The midday sun poured over the city like liquid gold, heating the pavement and making the glass towers glisten. Downtown buzzed with the usual rhythm of hurried footsteps, honking cars, and life being lived in full speed. People came and went, each mind preoccupied, each hand carrying coffee, phones, or briefcases, except one boy, barefoot and dirty, crouched near a trash can outside a five-star restaurant. His name was Arian, maybe 12, thin like a stick, with eyes too sharp for someone so young. His shirt had once been yellow. Now it was a mix of dust and street grease. He'd been sitting there all morning, silent, watching, waiting. For what? Even he didn't know. Inside the restaurant, everything was polished, spotless, and unreal. The chandeliers cast crystal reflections over perfectly white linen. There, at the farthest table, sat a man in a sleek black suit. His watch was worth more than the restaurant's monthly rent. His name was Dev Malhotra, billionaire, investor, and CEO of Malhotra Enterprises. He wasn't supposed to be here, but his usual restaurant had a fire alarm issue, and he hated delays. His assistant had found the next best five-star with a quick online search, and now here he was, scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to the steak in front of him. The waiter came with a dish Dev hadn't ordered. "Sir, compliments from the chef. A new creation. Limited to our VIP guest today," he said, smiling. Dev raised a brow. "Didn't order it." "It's on the house." Dev waved him off with a dismissive nod. "Leave it." The waiter set the silver plate down and walked away. The dish steamed gently. Something about it caught Dev's attention. Maybe it was the fragrance, sweet, savory, layered with something oddly familiar. He picked up his fork. Outside, Arian's eyes widened. His body snapped upright as he stared through the glass window. For a moment, he looked frozen, like a statue mid-breath. Then he leapt up and sprinted toward the entrance. He burst through the revolving door, knocking over a flower stand. Security was on him instantly, but before they could grab him, he shouted with all his might, "Don't eat that." The room went dead silent. Dev froze, fork inches from his mouth. The security guards grabbed the boy, but Dev raised a hand, halting them. "Bring him here," he said, voice calm but sharp like a knife. They dragged Arian to the table. The boy didn't flinch. His chest heaved, but his eyes were focused, locked on the dish in front of Dev. "You better explain," Dev said, glancing once at the dish, then back at the boy. Arian's voice cracked. "That dish, it's not what you think. Please, just don't eat it." The room was still. People watched from their tables, phones in hand, whispering. Dev narrowed his eyes. "You break into a restaurant and accuse my food of being, what? Poisoned." Arian swallowed. "I'm not lying. That dish, there's something wrong with it. Please, just throw it away." Dev leaned back, folding his arms. "Why should I believe a beggar?" Arian hesitated, then said, "Because I've seen what it does. My brother, he died after eating it." Dev blinked. Silence stretched longer. "What are you talking about?" he asked slowly. Arian pointed at the dish. "Last week, someone gave the same food to us. Said it was extra from a party. My brother was hungry. He ate it. In an hour, he couldn't breathe. By morning, he was gone." "Where?" Dev asked. "Near Sector 18. Behind the railway station. We live there in the slums." The waiter who had served the dish approached, pale. "Sir, should I take it away?" Dev looked at him sharply. "Where did this come from?" The waiter stammered. "From the chef, sir. It's a new recipe." "Call the chef," Dev ordered. Within minutes, the head chef arrived, confident, clean-shaven, and calm. "Is there a problem, Mr. Malhotra?" Dev gestured toward Arian. "The boy says this dish killed his brother." The chef laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous. We use only the finest ingredients." Arian stepped forward. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." The chef's face twitched. "You were at the party near Sector 18. You were throwing out food to the homeless. My brother thanked you. He was always polite. You gave him that same dish." The chef's hands curled into fists. "I don't know what he's talking about." Dev watched both of them, then took out his phone. "Let's test it then." The chef's face turned white. "Sir, There's no need for that. But Dev was already dialing. I'm sending the dish to the lab. And if I find even a trace of anything illegal, you'll be explaining it to the police. The chef moved suddenly, as if to grab the plate, but Dev stood first. Touch it and I'll break your fingers, he said, cold as stone. Security stepped in again. The chef froze. Take him, Dev said, and lock the kitchen. The chef was dragged away, screaming about lawyers and misunderstandings. The dish was sent to a private lab within the hour. Dev sat back down, staring at the table. He looked at Arian, who was still standing, trembling now that the adrenaline had faded. Sit, Dev said quietly. Arian hesitated, then took the seat opposite Dev, unsure if he was about to be scolded or thanked. You were right to stop me, Dev said. But I need to know more. Arian nodded. The man who gave us the food, he wasn't alone. There were others. They come every week with leftovers. We thought they were being kind. But people kept getting sick. You said nothing to the police. They don't listen to us. They told me maybe my brother ate too fast. Or maybe he had a virus. Nobody believed me. I stopped trusting them. Dev's jaw clenched. He looked out the window, mind racing. That night, the lab called. There's a trace of a banned preservative in the sauce, they said. Illegal. Highly toxic over repeated exposure, especially in children. Dev stared at his phone, then at the window. I want to know who supplied it, he said. And I want a full report. Everything. The next morning, Dev drove to Sector 18. Not in his black SUV, but in an old sedan. Arian sat beside him, quiet but alert. The slums were a different world. Children ran barefoot across mud and gravel. Women cooked on open fires. The smell of rot and smoke mixed in the air. Dev had never been here. Arian led him to a narrow alley where people recognized him. Whispers started. A billionaire in their midst. They reached a corner where a small, handmade shrine stood. A candle burned beside a photo, Arian's brother. Next to it, flowers, some toys, a cracked water bottle. Dev knelt beside it, wordless. He was only 10, Arian whispered. He always shared his food. That's why he took the biggest bite. Dev didn't speak for a long time. That evening, his office was full of fire. Investigators were brought in. The chef was arrested. It turned out he had been using low-grade ingredients bought off black market vendors to cut costs and pocket the difference. He didn't care who ate it. He only cared that it was all floated quickly. The vendor network ran deep. Restaurants, catering events, even hospitals were involved. Dev didn't stop with the chef. He funded a task force. He made calls to ministers. He turned this into a crusade. Within weeks, more than 30 vendors were shut down. Thousands of meals were pulled from the supply chain. People began to talk. News channels picked up the story. They called it the Beggar Boy's warning. But Arian didn't care about fame. He only cared about one thing: justice. One night, after a long meeting, de walked to the terrace of UCS building. Arian was already there, staring at the skyline. You don't talk much, Div said. Talking doesn't bring him back, Arian replied. Div nodded slowly. What would bring him peace? Arian turned. Feed the kids. The ones who are still here too. Div smiled faintly. You do more than that too. The next week, Div launched a new foundation. A food quality watchdog, staffed with nutritionists, safety experts, and former street kids trained to inspect SRP allies. Arian was its first youth ambassador. He didn't change overnight. He still wore the same shoes, still liked sitting closely get on the floor. But now, people listened when he spoke. And yet, Div knew this wasn't over. One night, Arian walked into Div's office with a newspaper. There was a small article buried on page 8. Another slum. Another child. Same symptoms. Arian placed the paper on the desk. Here is still out the article. Div looked at him. Can we hunt every last one of them too? Arian nodded once. We don't stop to. Div stood. We start the marathon. Arian says lit up not with revenue, but with purpose. Outside, the city kept moving. The skyscrapers blinked with light. But now, among them, stood two figures, one forged from gold, the other from dust. And together, they were just getting started. Div Mulhatter had lived his whole life calculating profits, risks, and returns. He built empires from numbers, crushed competitors with strategies, and turned every challenge into an opportunity. But that night, standing beside a 12-year-old boy in his office, staring at a newspaper clipping that should never been ignored, something shifted inside him, something far beyond business. The fight had become personal, not for prestige or headlines, but for justice. Real justice. The kind that didn't wear suits or stand behind microphones. The kind that crawled through dirt, stirred corruption in the vase, and said, not anymore to. The very next morning, Div summoned to his most trusted people, not the ones who managed the his world, but the ones who managed the secrets, surveillance, and silence. Which his private intelligence team. MIT was a hidden branch of his empire, mostly set to secure billion-dollar acquisitions or neutralize corporate threats. Now, he tasked them with something different, trace every last connection linked to the toxic food supply chain, legal or otherwise. The chief who had been arrested had only been a pawn. Div had spent enough time in boardrooms to know that nothing moved without orders and money. Someone, somewhere, had built a quiet industry feeding poison to the poor, confident no one would ever care enough to look. While Div moved to his PCs in silence, Aaron was doing his part on the ground. With a voice that still cricket and hand still too small to hold power, he began visiting neighborhoods like his on slowing the ignored by outrages, schools that weren't really schools, clinics that barely had medicine. But everywhere he went, children knew his name. The boy who stopped the billionaire. The boy whose short saved a life. He told them not to eat from strangers. He showed them how to check for spoiled food. But he also asked questions: how often did food get handed out? Who brought IT? What did IT look like? And slowly, Aaron was mapping a web of food donations that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with dumping unwanted leftovers and expired ingredients. MIT hasn't long before their maps connected. Div's team had uncovered a shadowy network of food contractors, fellow billionaire companies that didn't exist on paper but moved thousands of meals across the city daily. They operated from warehouses disguised as cold storages and to set shell corporations to secure deals with multi-marketeers and event managers. These meals were often rejected by clients or failed quality checks. But instead of being destroyed, they were handed off to these ghost vendors, who under the banner of generosity delivered them to slow the and our references. MIT was generous in its wickedness. There were no receipts, no witnesses, and no accountability. Just free food that killed slowly. One name kept popping up: Beggar Nutrients PVT Limited took a company that no longer had an office, no executive directors, and yet, somehow, was listed as the SRPLR in over 17 events in the past 3 months. When Div tried to dig further, files vanished, links broke, and silence answered every question. MIT was clear someone powerful was protecting IT. And then something strange happened. One night, Aaron didn't return from his usual round. Div waited. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. Nothing. No call. Not message. He dialed the only friend Aaron stayed with in Sector 18, but even they hadn't seen him. Panic swelled slowly, but deeply. Aaron was smart, careful, and always checked in. Div called to his security team and ordered a search not just near Sector 18, but city-wide. Within hours, every camera, checkpoint, and road was being reviewed. And then, finally, a grainy feed from a traffic cam caught him Aaron, being pulled into a by 2 men in black jackets near an alley behind a closed school. Div's word narrowed into fury. The kind that didn't shout. The kind that planned. He traced the van to a warehouse near the river Sech en old industrial unit that was supposedly abandoned. Within hours, Dev's private team surrounded it. He arrived there personally, wearing black and bulletproof, as blazing with something far more dangerous than fear. He walked in through the front as if he owned the place because in that moment, he did. 2 guards raised weapons, but Dev's men were faster. A struggle, a gunshot, a scream and then silence. Inside, Arian was tied to a chair, bruised, gagged, but alive. Dev cut the ropes himself. "You okay?" he asked, voice trembling with restrained rage. Arian nodded. "Which I guess is where white bottom. They wanted to scare me. Said I was talking too much. Said I was ruining business too." Dev stood. "You ruin more than that, too." The next day, the media exploded. A raid on an illegal food distribution center linked to a dozen child deaths. Videos leaked of filthy storage rooms, rotting vegetables packed as fresh, meat crawling with maggots being ground into special sauces. Dev didn't hide behind lawyers. He gave a press conference on live television, standing beside Arian. "I was served this food. I was seconds from eating it. But this boy," he said, placing a hand on Arian's shoulder, "stopped me. He lost his brother, and he saved me. Now we're going to save others." The story ignited the nation. Politicians scrambled to act. Laws were revisited. Regulations were enforced. But none of that mattered to Arian. What mattered was that the raids didn't stop. The warehouses kept getting exposed. And the big names started to fall. Among them, a surprise, Rajiv Bhargava, a respected businessman, philanthropist, organizer of dozens of food donation drives across the city. He ran orphanages, sponsored school meals, and smiled in every newspaper. But behind closed doors, he had built a business empire out of expired food stocks and bribes to food safety inspectors. Bhargava Nutrients wasn't defunct, it was his private poison pipeline. When Dev confronted him, Rajiv smiled like a man who believed he was still untouchable. "You think one boy and a few cameras will bring me down," he said. Dev stared at him. "No, but evidence will." Rajiv's smile faded. "We have your phone calls, your storage footage, your ledgers, and your delivery trucks. We traced your payments, your shell companies, and even your private tasting chef," Dev said. "You see, I didn't just come for justice. I came to finish you." That night, Rajiv Bhargava was arrested in his mansion. But Dev didn't stop there. He used every ounce of his influence to launch a national initiative, Clean Plate India. It funded mobile food testing vans that visited slums, schools, and hospitals. It created a hotline for reporting unsafe food. And at its heart was Arian, who, now better dressed but just as fierce, went on speaking tours to every city, telling his story not as a victim, but as a fighter. And yet, for all the accolades and applause, Arian never forgot where he came from. He still visited the alley where his brother died, still placed flowers by the candle, still sat on the pavement sometimes, silent, watching people pass by. One evening, as Dev sat beside him, he asked, "What are you thinking?" Arian didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "I wonder if he sees all this, if he knows." Dev put a hand on his shoulder. "He does." Arian looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you first saw me, why did you believe me?" Dev thought for a moment, then said, "Because in that moment, your voice wasn't small. It was powerful. Truth always sounds different." Arian nodded. The wind rustled gently. Somewhere in the distance, laughter rang. Children playing, fed, alive. And the city that once ignored a boy like Arian now listened carefully. But this wasn't the end. One morning, a letter arrived at Dev's desk, unsigned, typed, with no return address. It said, "Bhargava was only one of us. The food business has many heads. And you've made enemies, Malhotra. Watch your back." And the boys. Dev read it twice. Then he picked up the phone. "Arian," he said, "we have more work to do." Because they knew something now, evil didn't sleep. And neither would they. The air was thick with tension as Dev read the ominous letter one last time. It was brief but clear. Their victory over Bargov was only a small battle in a larger war. There were others, more powerful, more dangerous, who had been quietly profiting off the suffering of millions. And they were now aware of the threat that Dev and Aryan posed. The warning was direct. They were coming for them. Dev leaned back in his chair, the weight of the words settling heavily in his chest. He had faced enemies before, ruthless businessmen, corrupt politicians, even the occasional betrayal from within his own ranks. But this felt different. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, power, and the ability to manipulate lives from behind the shadows. These were the kinds of people who never let go. If they could have destroyed him when he was just a businessman, they would have. But now it was personal. The letter was clear. They had a vendetta. They were watching. Aryan, Dev whispered, his voice low, almost as if the words were meant for himself as much as for the boy. We need to prepare. Aryan, who had been standing by the window, watching the city below, turned slowly. His face was calm, yet there was a fire behind his eyes, a determination that had never wavered since the day he first stepped into Dev's life. He was no longer just a boy who shouted in the street. He was a symbol now, a living testament to the power of courage and truth. But the innocence of that boy was fading fast. In its place was someone wiser, someone who understood the stakes of what they were up against. You read it too, didn't you? Aryan asked, his voice steady despite the fear that was beginning to swirl in the pit of his stomach. Dev nodded. I did. And we're not backing down. We've come too far. I know, Aryan said, his eyes narrowing as he looked out over the sprawling city. But it's more than just us now, isn't it? They've hurt so many people, and we've only scratched the surface. If we stop now, it'll all go back to the way it was. Dev was silent for a long moment, considering the truth of Aryan's words. He thought back to the countless raids, the schools, the orphanages, the slums they had visited in their fight to expose the food corruption, the children they had saved, the families they had helped, the lives that had been changed, saved. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. There were still too many who were slipping through the cracks, too many who still didn't know the truth. You're right, Dev said finally. We can't stop. Not now. We finish this. We tear it all down. With that resolve, they set their plan in motion. The first step was to protect themselves. Dev reached out to his most trusted security team. He fortified his home, ensuring no one could breach it. He expanded his personal network of contacts, intelligence, private investigators, and cyber experts. If anyone thought they could find him, they would be sorely mistaken. He was going to become a ghost, harder to track than ever before. But it wasn't enough to hide. The real fight was still out there, on the streets, in the hearts of the people who had been poisoned by this system. Aryan, too, knew that their battle wasn't just about physical safety. It was about making sure that the message was never silenced. The people had to know the truth, every last detail, every name, every connection. The story of Bargov and the others couldn't be buried. They had to expose the entire food cartel, from the politicians who took bribes to the corporate executives who green-lighted the poisonous deliveries. It was a delicate dance of public perception, power, and raw truth. Together, they orchestrated a series of public exposés. They started small, releasing stories to local news outlets, stories about the impact of the poisoned food on children's health, about the lives ruined by the greed of unseen players. The story spread like wildfire, igniting protests, creating pressure on lawmakers to act. The public outcry grew louder with every piece of evidence they presented. It was no longer just Dev and Aryan against the corrupt industry. It was the people against the shadows. But as the media storm intensified, so did the threats. Dev began to receive phone calls, anonymous, threatening. The voice on the other end was always distorted, cold, but it was always the same message. Stop. Or we'll stop you. But Dev refused to back down. Instead, he used the threats as fuel. He took the risks in stride, knowing that this was the cost of changing the world. He sent his team to infiltrate the remaining strongholds of the Food Network. Every lead, Every clue they gathered brought them closer to the top. They traced the money, followed the connections, and slowly, methodically, they closed in on the real masterminds. Finally, they discovered the shocking truth. It wasn't just a handful of rogue businessmen. The corruption ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. The network they had uncovered was a multi-billion-dollar operation, spanning continents. It had politicians in its pocket, celebrities on its payroll, and media outlets silenced by payoffs. It was a hydra. Every time they cut off one head, two more appeared. But now they were ready. Dev and Arian had built a coalition of like-minded allies, activists, investigative journalists, and even former insiders from within the food industry who were willing to testify. The day of reckoning arrived when Arian's name appeared on the front page of every major newspaper. It wasn't just the story of the boy who shouted, "Don't eat that." It was the story of a child who had defied the odds and taken down a billion-dollar empire. The food cartel was exposed. The names were out there: Rajiv Bhargava, the politicians, the executives, and their accomplices. The people rose up in fury, demanding accountability, and it was no longer possible to sweep this under the rug. But as the arrests were made and the trials began, something unexpected happened. Rajiv Bhargava, who had been imprisoned, turned to face the cameras during a court hearing. His eyes were filled with fury, but also something else, a quiet admission of defeat. As the judge declared him guilty, Bhargava whispered one last thing, his voice cutting through the silence of the courtroom. "You think this is the end? You're wrong. The real power lies beyond your reach." Dev and Arian exchanged a glance. It wasn't over. Not yet. The shadows hadn't disappeared. And just as the storm seemed to calm, another twist emerged. A new player had entered the game, one far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The true puppet masters, the ones who had built the food empire from the ground up, had remained hidden, waiting for the right moment. They were watching, always watching. But this time, Dev and Arian weren't alone. They had the power of the people behind them. They had the truth. And they had each other. As the trial continued, the walls of the old system began to crumble. New leaders emerged, voices from the grassroots who had been inspired by Arian's bravery and Dev's relentless pursuit of justice. In the end, the entire corrupt food network collapsed. The streets were no longer lined with poisoned meals. The orphanages no longer served rotting leftovers. And the children, once silenced by hunger and neglect, had a future. But for Arian, the victory was bittersweet. The fight had cost him his childhood, his innocence, and even some of his peace. Yet, he knew that the world they had rebuilt was better than the one they had inherited. Dev looked at him as they stood together in front of the courtroom, the final gavel ringing in the background. "You did it, Arian. We did it." Arian nodded, his eyes clear, but the weight of their journey heavy on his heart. "No, we all did it. And now we watch." As they walked away from the courthouse, the sun began to set behind them, casting long shadows, but also bringing with it a new dawn. And in that moment, Arian realized something. The real power didn't lie in the hands of those who sought to control and deceive. It lay in the courage of those who dared to speak out. It lay in the heart of one boy who refused to stay silent. And it lay, now, in the promise of a new world.